You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This episode is about productivity. I'm passionate about productivity. I've done lots of episodes on this topic, and I've read a lot about the subject and looked into lots of different approaches. And if you've been listening to the show, you probably know that the approach to productivity that I find most useful is David Allen's Getting Things Done approach. If you don't know about this approach, the book by the same name, Getting Things Done by David Allen, is a good introduction to GTD. But this approach is the one that makes most sense to me. I like the fact that it's a system and I find it very helpful. It's an approach that I use. However, some aspects of getting things done don't work for me. Not all of the approach that David Allen developed makes sense to me, and I haven't adopted all of the ideas in that approach. I've been selective about which ideas I take and which ideas I reject. Although it is a kind of systematic approach to productivity, you don't have to adopt every single element of the system, and they don't all have to be there for you to get value out of the aspects of GTD that you do adopt. So there are some aspects of GTD that I have consciously decided not to follow, and I thought it might be interesting to do an episode about those aspects of GTD that I reject. I think it's a great idea to take productivity ideas that work for you and not the ones that don't work for you, and to adapt a system for yourself if you're interested in productivity. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about all of those parts of GTD that I don't use and explain what I do instead. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is that I don't use the 43 folders idea in GTD. Just to explain this for people who are not aware of it, in David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, he originally talked about this idea of organizing paper that comes into your life with this system of having 43 folders in a kind of like in a filing cabinet or an expandable file case of some kind. And his idea was that you put things that you might need in the future, paper and letters and things that come into your life, you put them in one of these 43 folders. And a typical example that he talks about in the book, if I remember rightly, is a theatre ticket for a show that you're going to go and see at some point in the future. You need to keep that because you're going to use it in the future, but you don't need it right now, today, because you're not going to the theatre for 2 weeks or something. So where do you put that ticket? And he had this 43 folder system, which is 43 folders, I think, because if I remember rightly, it's 31 days for the days of the month, and then 12 folders for each month of the year. And his idea was that you're supposed to every day move the folders around so that the correct folder for the right day of the month is at the front, and then the month that you're in, and then the months behind are months ahead in the year. And so you put things that you'll need in future into the folder for the day of the month, or if it's not in this month, then just for the future month that it will be in. Now, this always seemed like quite a convoluted system to me, and I never trusted the idea that I was going to be moving folders around every day. It just seemed to me like that's going to be too much messing about. I never bought into the idea of this 43 folders thing. Now, to be fair, I think David Allen might have removed this idea from later versions of the book, because it was very much an idea based in the use of paper. And there's so many people who are paperless now that I think he may have even removed this idea. But I never bought into this 43 folders idea. I always had just folders containing things that I need for various projects, and then I use calendars and reminders if I needed to remember to do something in the future. And of course, a task management system like OmniFocus. Later on, after adopting GTD, I went paperless anyway, so the 43 folders idea was just completely irrelevant to me. But this is one example of an idea that David Allen suggested that I never wanted to take on, and you don't need to take it on if you want to do GTD. So that's the first idea. The next element of getting things done that I don't use is the idea of waiting for actions. So in getting things done, you manage your projects and tasks with a whole kind of system approach. And one of the suggestions that David Allen has in the book is that if you are working on a project and you are waiting for somebody to get back to you about something, then you make an action for yourself, which is waiting for, and then you can put the name of the person and what it is that you're waiting for them to get back to you. So it might be that you're waiting on Sarah to send you the draft report or something like that, whatever it is. This never really made sense to me, this idea, because it just doesn't seem to conform to getting things done as far as I understand the whole approach. Because the whole approach of getting things done as a productivity system is that you are thinking in terms of next actions, in terms of what you can do next on a project. And so you write down actions that you can do, actions like phone Sam or write proposal or something like that. These are verbs that you can do, and you can't do waiting for. It's not an action that you can do. You are waiting for something, but you can't actively do anything to wait for somebody. So I always found that to be a rather clumsy idea that didn't seem to fit within getting things done. And the alternative approach that I use is I just make a task to chase someone about something. And I defer that task into the future by however long it's reasonable to wait. And then if the person gets back to me in the meantime, when that chase task comes up, I just delete it. But if they haven't got back to me, then I know that in future I'm going to get a reminder to chase something if I'm waiting for it and the person hasn't got back to me. So that's my suggestion for an alternative to the waiting for idea in getting things done. I wrote an article about this on my personal blog, so if you're interested, I'll put a link to that in the show notes and you can have a look. The next way in which I break the rules of classic GTD practice is I don't review all my projects weekly. One of the ideas in getting things done is that you should do a weekly review and you should look through all your projects and just make sure that they're on track and, if necessary, define the next action for each one of them and so forth. And I got this idea from David Sparks, who does the Mac Power Users podcast. And he made the point on that podcast that not everything needs a weekly review. It's total overkill for some projects. And I think the reason that David Allen suggested this is because when he wrote the book, he was trying to keep the system simple. And this is before people had task management applications like OmniFocus. Originally, a lot of people were getting things done just on paper and by hand. And so a simple thing to do is just go through all your projects on a weekly basis. But these days, we have applications that you can choose to remind you to review things on either a weekly basis or a monthly basis or 2 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever you want. You can review things every 6 months if you choose to. So the idea is that you set the schedule that you want to review each project depending on what the project really requires. And that gives you a lot more flexibility, and it means you don't have to look through every single one of your projects every week if it's not relevant at the moment. I find that a much better approach, and it still achieves the basic idea that David Allen had, which is for you to be able to be confident and rest assured that you know you will look at that project again on a regular basis, and whenever it needs to be looked at, you're going to get a reminder from your system to look at it, but it doesn't have to be weekly. The next getting things done idea that I break the rules on is I don't do my weekly reviews all at once. So in getting things done, the idea of this weekly review is that once a week you go through a whole series of tasks. And this involves clearing all your inboxes, organizing all your projects, reviewing all your creative lists and so forth. And David Allen makes the point that there are sort of 3 elements to a weekly review. There's the clear review, which is about kind of cleaning everything up and clearing your inboxes. Then there's the current review, which is about going through all your projects and making sure things are up to date. And then there's the creative review, which is more forward-looking and thinking about new ideas and so forth. And the thing about these 3 different groups of tasks that you need to do in your weekly review is that they require a very different mindset. It's a different type of mindset when you're clearing out all your inboxes than it is to when you're doing some really good project planning. And it's also, those 2 mindsets, again, are different from the creative thinking that you do for your creative review. And a really good idea that I picked up ages ago from another GTD practitioner is the idea that you don't need to do these 3 different elements of the weekly review on the same day. If it takes a different mindset, then it can be kind of nice to one day do all of the kind of cleanup tasks, and another day do all of the organizational tasks, and a third day do all of the creative tasks. And I found that to be a really nice way of doing a weekly review, to split it up and do part of it on different days. I don't always do that because it kind of depends on what else I've got planned for the week. So sometimes I will do a weekly review all on one day, and I go through phases where I split it up or do it all together. But this is a nice option to have, so that you don't have to do a weekly review in one sitting. You can do different aspects of your review at different times of the week. So another idea that I picked up, again from David Sparks, I think, is the idea of not doing project reviews as part of your weekly review. Again, this sort of breaks the rules of getting things done. According to Getting Things Done, one of the key things that you do in a weekly review is to go through each of your projects and review them and look at the tasks remaining and so forth. And it's a pretty core part of the weekly review is the actual project review, where you go through each one of your projects and make sure they've got next actions and so forth. But what David Sparks does, and other people do as well, is instead of going through this long list of projects and reviewing them all in your weekly review, he reviews a couple of projects every day rather than doing them all at once. So it's more like a daily habit than a weekly routine. And the argument that he gives for this approach is that if you review all your projects in a weekly review, then by the time you get halfway down the list, you're already pretty mentally tired and you're doing only perfunctory reviews of those projects. You're not really giving them the attention that they deserve. And so instead, what he does is review one or two projects every day, just on a rolling basis. This is something that I am just experimenting with now. It's not settled into my routine yet, and I'm still trying to work out whether I do want to do it this way. I have to say it's not fully working for me yet, doing it like this, but I'm experimenting with it, and I think it's an interesting alternative approach. Another way that I'm not really following the GTD rules is that I do use time blocking. To be fair, time blocking isn't something that really breaks the rules of getting things done. However, one of the main ideas in getting things done is that time blocking can be ineffective because in the modern working world, there's so much happening that is unpredictable that you have to be flexible and be able to adapt. And if you block out exactly what you're going to do in each part of the day and each day of the week, then events will overtake you very quickly and all your time blocking will kind of be a waste of time. And I certainly think this is true in big organizations, and especially when you're working together with other people. David Allen really emphasizes in Getting Things Done that you need to be able to cope with changing circumstances and stay productive despite the fact that new things are always coming at you. And I used to get a lot out of that approach in Getting Things Done, which is all about being ready to be flexible and being ready to switch plans when circumstances change, and being ready to make the most of the little bits of time that you get when you're constantly on the move. The typical situation that David Allen is kind of thinking of is if you're waiting to board a plane and you still want to be productive, you need to be able to know, well, what can I do right now? Which of my tasks could I accomplish right now? And Getting Things Done as an approach is a way of organizing your tasks in such a way that you can have the answer very easily to that question and be able to get on with something right now, even if you're just waiting to board a plane. But the thing is, if you work alone and if you do things that are pretty much all under your own control, as I do in making podcasts and writing books, then this kind of flexibility becomes less relevant. And actually, it can be really helpful to block time and plan in a more detailed way what you're going to do in each part of the day, because the main thing that I'm fighting against in productivity is myself. It's my own ability to get sidetracked and procrastinate and do other things instead of what I really want to get done. And I find time blocking to be quite helpful. So I've got back into the use of using the Pomodoro technique to decide on work sessions throughout the day and to plan my day in advance. And as I said, this isn't really breaking the rules of GTD, but it's definitely a different type of approach to what Getting Things Done's main idea is. I got this idea from listening to Sean Blank talk about his approach to scheduling his whole day. And although that seems like a bit of overkill to me, I definitely find it helpful to schedule the Pomodoros that I'm going to do each day, the work sessions, and what I'm going to do in each of those work sessions. Another way in which I'm not following core getting things done is that I do use some thinking tools that David Allen doesn't talk about in the book Getting Things Done. In Getting Things Done, David Allen talks about some tools, like, for example, he talks about mind maps, which I do find very, very helpful. And he talks about natural project planning. And these are various ideas that I don't think originally come from David Allen, but they're tools for thinking with that he's kind of put together in his book. But there are some other tools for productivity that he doesn't talk about, which I find very helpful. And I've done a whole episode talking about different tools to think with. It's episode 128, and it's called 8 Tools to Free Your Mind. 2 tools that I find very valuable that David Allen didn't talk about in Getting Things Done are process maps. It's the first one. This is a really powerful tool. In fact, I've done an episode on this too. It's episode 205, called The Most Powerful Planning Tool I Know. Process maps are like workflow diagrams. It's a bit difficult to describe on a podcast because they're very visual things, but you can check out episode 205 if you're interested, and I'll put links to all these in the show notes. Another tool that I find helpful is a Pomodoro timer, and that's for concentrating on work sessions and then taking planned breaks. Again, I talk more about this in episode 120, which I can put a link to in the show notes. There are various other things that I find really helpful that David Allen doesn't talk about in Getting Things Done, so aren't really GTD, but are really important, in particular habits and establishing routines, morning and evening routines and stuff like that. I've done episodes on habits as well. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But these are some of the ways in which I don't follow the rules of GTD. I don't follow all of the system, and I do some things differently. I still hugely admire David Allen's ideas and find them extremely helpful. And overall, I find the GTD system to be a great foundation for productivity. But ideas are never a package deal. Whenever you read a book by somebody else, it's always good to take it apart and put it back together again and work out which bits work for you. And although every author thinks that they're producing a system in which all of the parts are integral and necessary, the truth is usually that actually you, as a reader, can see where they have some stuff that is unnecessary or irrelevant and other stuff that's just great. So I find it really helpful not to assume that you have to take on everything in any system of ideas. But the more that you can adopt your own approach to productivity and take on things that work for you and adapt ideas to yourself, then the better your system's going to work for you, because it's going to be something that you have a real sense of ownership about. And that goes for any ideas in any field. The more that you are critical rather than just taking on what other people do, then the more free you are to think for yourself.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you like this podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron of The Voluntary Life on Patreon. Your support will help to grow and improve the show, and you'll get access to a treasure trove of rewards, including bonus episodes. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to learn more.